She saved a stranger's life, wrapped his wound with her bare hands. Called 911, stayed until help came. The next morning, she was fired without warning. No explanation. Just silence from the hospital. But that afternoon, 2 helicopters landed on the roof, and every doctor stopped what they were doing to look up. If you believe that dignity doesn't depend on status, and that some debts can't be paid with money, stay with us. Like, subscribe, or share a thought if this story stirs something in you. At 2:11 a.m. Jefferson Medical Center was not silent, but it was still, the kind of still that made even the steady beep of machines sound hesitant. Dr. Naomi Brooks had just clocked out from a 14-hour shift in the trauma unit. Her coat was draped over her forearm, and her body ached in places she no longer paid attention to. She was halfway down the corridor when the sliding doors slammed open. 2 security guards rushed in with a gurney. On it lay a man, mid-50s, bloodied, shirt ripped open, no ID visible. His face was obscured by swelling, his jaw slack. Naomi froze for half a breath. The guards were shouting over each other. No name. Found outside the lot. Bleeding bad. The admitting nurse hesitated, already flipping through forms. We need identification. Protocol. Naomi didn't wait. Trauma bay. 3. Now, she said, tossing her coat onto a nearby chair. Her voice cut through the air like a scalpel clean. Exact. The nurse blinked. The guard stood still. Naomi was already wheeling the gurney forward herself. She snapped on gloves, tore the soaked fabric from the man's chest, and pressed down where the bleeding was worst. Her hand met skin cold, clammy but firm beneath the softness. The pulse was faint, too faint. She leaned in closer. "Stay with me," she whispered, not knowing if he could hear, not caring. What caught her wasn't the severity of the wound, or even the adrenaline kicking in too late in the night. It was his hand, rough, worn, not like the hands of most patients she treated at this hour. Calloused, like someone who'd worked hard his whole life. There was something dissonant about that. A body bleeding out like a forgotten man, but hands that had once built something that mattered. She didn't know why it stayed with her, but it did. Inside the trauma bay, her team moved fast once she barked orders. A junior resident hovered near the curtain. "Dr. Brooks, we need clearance." Naomi didn't look up, then "Get out of my way." 15 minutes passed, then 20. The bleeding slowed. A transfusion was started. Vitals stabilized barely. When the patient was wheeled into post-op, Naomi stood back, the gloves sagging off her wrists, her hands red. She scrubbed out in silence. Her face in the mirror was pale, jaw clenched. She looked tired, not from the hours, from something else. At 8:03 a.m., she received a text. Conference room B. Now. No signature. She knew who it was from. She walked in wearing the same shoes, same fatigue. Dr. Charles Grant sat at the head of the long table. Around him were 3 other department leads, all older, all in suits that still held morning starch. Naomi didn't sit. Dr. Grant gestured at the papers in front of him. "You disregarded hospital policy. Again, you know the rules. Dr. Brooks, you do not treat unidentified individuals without proper intake." "He would have died," she said. "That's not your decision to make. That's the law. That's the structure." His voice never rose. It didn't need to. "You risked malpractice, endangered the hospital's standing, and made us liable. This is not South Shore Clinic. This is Jefferson." Naomi stared at the papers. Termination notice. Immediate. "I want you to understand," Grant said, his hands folded neatly. "This is not personal. But a doctor who refuses to follow chain of command cannot practice here." A pause, then something quieter. "People like you need to learn where the boundaries are." The silence afterward was not empty. It was full of unsaid things, of stares that flickered but never settled, of a woman standing alone while 3 men avoided her eyes. Naomi didn't argue, didn't defend. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked out. Outside. The hallway had already shifted into its daytime rhythm, carts rolling, scrubs brushing past. the scent of antiseptic stronger under fluorescent light, but none of it touched her. She passed the nurse's station where she'd once been congratulated for saving a teenager shot in the back, walked by the vending machine that had eaten her last dollar 2 nights ago, crossed the threshold of the hospital without a coat. The morning air hit her lungs sharp. She looked down at her hands. There were faint traces of red, still caught under her nails. The stranger's blood. She rubbed them together slowly, as if memory could be erased with friction. Then she let them fall to her sides, fingers loose. She didn't look back, but something in her walk said she wasn't finished yet. The bus didn't come. Naomi stood at the edge of the curb near 51st and Cottage Grove, her tote bag pressing against her hip, one hand gripping the strap like it could hold her together. The air was damp with drizzle, the kind that lingered on skin instead of falling. Streetlights blinked half-heartedly across the cracked sidewalk. Bronzeville was never quiet, but tonight it held a strange hush, like even the city didn't know what to say to her. She'd walked home the night before, not because she had to, but because the idea of sitting still on a bus full of people who didn't know she had been fired before sunrise, felt unbearable. No one had said goodbye, no one had looked her in the eye. She had walked through the hospital lobby with her badge still clipped to her pocket, though she knew it wouldn't scan again. The small apartment above the laundromat hadn't changed. Same leaky faucet, same cracked window frame in the kitchen. She hadn't turned on the light when she came in. Some things didn't need to be seen to be felt. The coat she'd worn to work still hung on the doorknob. Her white blouse was draped across the back of a chair, a dried stain just below the cuff. She hadn't tried to wash it. She didn't want to. The blood wasn't hers, but the moment had been. She had saved someone, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. She picked up the blouse again that morning, held it against her chest for a second, then folded it quietly and placed it back where it was. Not cleaned, just acknowledged, far uptown. On the 32nd floor of the Peninsula Hotel, Elijah Whitmore opened his eyes for the first time in 3 days. The room was silent except for the beep of machines and the low hum of the air conditioner. A private nurse hovered near the bed, surprised by how alert his gaze had become. "Elijah," she said carefully, "you're stable. Just don't try to speak yet." But his voice came, low and dry. "Who brought me here?" The nurse looked to the attending physician, who hesitated. "You were found in the alley near the medical center, a trauma case. There's no ID on file yet." Elijah closed his eyes again, but not from weakness. He saw something. A woman's face, stern but calm, dark eyes behind a surgical mask. He didn't know her name, but something in her hand, firm and steady against his chest, had pulled him back. By late afternoon, Naomi stood at the bus stop, same as always, wearing the same pair of sneakers she used during her residency. The wind picked up, curling against her calves. She looked straight ahead, trying not to let her mind go too far in any direction. Then came the sound, low and impossible to miss. A deep rumble in the air. She looked up. 2 black helicopters hovered above, kicking dust and paper wrappers into the street. People nearby ducked or reached for phones. Naomi just stood still. They landed in an open lot, 2 blocks away, next to the abandoned strip mall. The blades slowed, the sound thinning. From one of them, a man in a gray overcoat stepped out. Not hurried, not showy, just certain. He carried something in his left hand. It was an envelope, heavy paper, cream-colored, with her name written in blue ink across the front. Dr. Naomi Brooks. The man walked straight toward her without pause. No introduction, no performance. Just a small nod, and the envelope, extended as if it weighed more than it looked. She took it. He said, "Mr. Whitmore asked that you read it in private. He said you'd know why." And before she could respond, he turned back, coat lifting slightly in the breeze. The rotor blades picked up again. The envelope was warm from his hand. She didn't open it right away. Not because she was afraid of what was inside, but because something about the way it was handed to her felt like the start of something that couldn't be undone. Brooklyn Blend sat on the corner of 53rd and King Drive, tucked between a closed barbershop and a faded mural of Dr. King. It wasn't fancy 2 rows of booths with chipped wooden backs, a chalkboard menu, and the scent of burnt espresso lingering in the corners. But for Naomi Brooks, it had always been a place to disappear in plain sight. The regulars respected quiet. The owner, Miss Jolene, offered free refills if you stayed long enough. And the students, most of them from the nearby community college, knew better than to ask too many questions when she corrected their med school applications with red ink and a steady hand. She sat at the back, near the window, where the sun hit the table just enough to warm her fingers. The envelope lay in front of her, unopened. The paper felt heavier than it should, cream-colored, her name written in handwriting that looked almost formal. She hadn't opened it because doing so meant acknowledging the way it had arrived by helicopter, hand-delivered by a man in a tailored coat who hadn't introduced himself but who had said, simply, "Mr. Whitmore wanted you to have this." Naomi didn't tell anyone at the cafe. But eyes followed her as she walked in that morning. People weren't subtle in Bronzeville. They'd seen the helicopters. They'd seen her standing still while the wind from the blades blew dust into the street. A couple of heads had turned as she passed by tables. A whisper here, a nudge there. She didn't care. She ordered black coffee and nothing else. No sugar, no cream. 10 minutes in, the door opened again. This time, slower, quieter, and still, somehow. The entire room noticed. He was tall, not towering, but the kind of presence that rearranged a room without asking. A gray suit, crisp but not loud, polished shoes, no tie. He walked with the steady confidence of someone used to meetings on the 50th floor, not cracked sidewalks and plastic chairs. Naomi looked up before anyone else. She knew him instantly. Elijah Whitmore, not from the papers, not from headlines. She knew him by the way his voice had sounded in the trauma bay, weak but alive. She remembered the weight of his chest under her palm, the strange certainty that he mattered long before she learned his name. He walked straight to her table. "Dr. Brooks," he said. Her voice was even. "You didn't need to come here. I thought I might owe you more than a thank you card." He didn't sit until she gave the slightest nod. Then he did. No small talk, no theatrics. "I owe you my life." Naomi sipped her coffee. "Then live it better." Elijah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't expect gratitude, but I wanted to say it in person. I didn't do it for you," she said quietly. "I did it because I knew I could, and I wasn't about to let another black woman get blamed for someone dying on her watch." That landed, not because it was harsh, but because it was true. He leaned back, taking her in. She wasn't what he expected. No soft edges, no performance. She wasn't angry. She wasn't flattered. She looked like someone who had stopped waiting to be believed a long time ago. "I know what happened at Jefferson," he said, "and I'm sorry." Naomi didn't flinch. "You're not the one who fired me." "No, but I'm the one who can do something about it." She raised an eyebrow. He reached into his coat pocket and set the envelope gently on the table between them. "You'll want to open this, not because I say so, but because what's inside might change what comes next." Naomi looked at it, then back at him. "I don't want a job," she said. "This isn't a job offer." "Then what is it?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. A starting point. He stood, his chair legs scraping softly against the tile. He adjusted his cuff, then looked at her one last time, not with pity, not with power, just presence. "Take your time." Naomi watched him walk out. No one in the cafe moved until the door clicked shut behind him. She looked down at the envelope again. Her name still stared back at her, untouched. And for the first time in days, she let her fingers rest on it, not to open it. Not yet, but to feel the weight of something that might finally be hers to carry on her own terms. Naomi didn't open the envelope on the bus. She kept it pressed against her thigh, tucked beneath the fold of her coat as the city blurred past outside the fogged windows. When the bus jolted over a pothole on South Drexel, she reached up to steady herself and noticed her fingers were trembling not from cold, but from something deeper. She held still until her stop came, then stepped down onto the cracked sidewalk without looking back. Her apartment smelled faintly of old coffee and the lavender oil her mother used to rub into her temples during finals week. She set the envelope on the table and made tea out of habit. Steam rose, but she didn't drink it. She pulled the shades down halfway, sat at the kitchen table, and finally picked up the letter. The seal broke with a soft tear. Inside was a card on heavy paper, an embossed logo at the top, Avalon Grand Hotel. Below it, typed in clean serif font, was an invitation to the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala held in honor of innovation and service in healthcare. The event was scheduled for the coming Friday. Her name was listed as an honored guest. She exhaled, already shaking her head. But there was more. Folded behind the card was a photograph, old, slightly faded, the corners worn soft. Naomi unfolded it and felt her breath catch before her mind could catch up. A hospital hallway, Jefferson Medical, unmistakable even after 30 years. A man in a white coat stood with a clipboard. Beside him, a girl 7, maybe 8, clutched a teddy bear and smiled through 2 missing front teeth. The handwriting on the back was faint but legible. 1993. Dr. Jeremiah Brooks, ER Chief, Jefferson Medical, her father. She hadn't seen that photo in years. Maybe never. It wasn't from any family album. It must have been taken by someone at the hospital, back when her father still let her visit once a month before everything fell apart. Before he remarried. Before her mother stopped answering his calls. Before Naomi learned the difference between being loved and being included. She traced the photo with her thumb. The man beside the girl looked composed, proud, important. But she remembered how distant he had felt, even when his hand rested on her shoulder. He had never introduced her to anyone at work. Never used the word daughter. Elijah knew. He had to. That photo hadn't come from nowhere. He hadn't just picked her name off a list. He had found that photo, placed it in the envelope, and sent it with a message buried beneath ink and paper. Naomi stood, walked across the room, and set the photo against the fridge magnet from her alma mater. It tilted slightly, the weight pulling one corner down. She adjusted it, but didn't pin it flat. The invitation still lay on the table. She stared at it for a long time. Avalon Grand was not a place people like her walked into without holding a tray or pushing a mop. It wasn't meant for someone whose medical career had just been erased over a decision made in good faith. And yet, there her name was, typed clean, no hesitation. She folded the card slowly and placed it back into the envelope. She didn't throw it away. That night, she called no one, not her mother, not her former colleagues, not even the student who had asked her to write a recommendation letter the week before. She simply lay on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan, arms crossed over her stomach like she needed to hold herself in place. Mistake or not, she whispered to no one, "He knows who I am." Then, after a long silence, "And he's playing with something I buried a long time ago." She didn't plan to go. She told herself that, said it out loud, even. But when morning came, she found herself Googling the address of the Avalon Grand and checking how long it would take to get there from Bronzeville on the Red Line. She didn't look up the dress code. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. 3 days passed. Naomi didn't respond to the invitation, nor to the texts from a former nurse who asked if she was okay. She kept her schedule tight. Mornings were for the local health workshops, afternoons for mentoring students at the Learning Center near 47th Street. She didn't speak about Jefferson Medical, and no one pressed her, not in Bronzeville, not when silence was the only shield people knew how to offer. On Friday morning, she walked into the South Shore Community Clinic wearing her old sneakers, a pressed but faded gray blouse, and a quiet determination. The walls were the same peeling beige as years ago, when she'd volunteered here as a med student. Same front desk, same bowl of peppermints no one touched. She filled out the volunteer form without looking up. She didn't need an income right now. She needed purpose, motion, somewhere to place her hands. While reviewing the paperwork with the receptionist, she heard someone clear their throat gently behind her. She turned. Elijah Whitmore stood in the doorway, holding a brown paper bag with the Lula Cafe logo on it, and a half-apologetic smile. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got 2 of everything. Naomi blinked. Are you following me now? He didn't flinch. No, but I do read grant applications. Your name came up more than once. I thought it was time to stop pretending we hadn't already crossed paths. She crossed her arms but didn't leave. The receptionist glanced between them, then ducked into the back office. You don't have to feed me, Naomi said flatly. I know, but you skipped the part where I get to ask you something without a table of donors between us. She hesitated, then gestured toward the small park across the street. They have benches and pigeons. Take your pick. They sat near the far edge of the park, where the trees barely filtered the light and the city noise thinned out. Kids played behind them, the slap of a basketball echoing off concrete. Elijah unpacked the food slowly, laying napkins over his lap like he didn't quite know how to stop performing formality. Naomi didn't touch the food. She watched the kids instead. My mother was a nurse, she said after a long pause. 25 years. Never made it past night shifts and IV rounds. They told her she was too loud, too opinionated. She sounds like someone I'd want running a department. She's tired now. Doesn't argue anymore. Elijah unwrapped a sandwich, then stopped. You didn't mention your father. Naomi glanced sideways. No, I didn't. Silence stretched. Not heavy, just present. I came across your application, Elijah said finally. You proposed a community-first medical training model. Hands-on, neighborhood-rooted. It got rejected without review. She nodded. Not surprised. I was supposed to vet it. I didn't even see it. That's on me. Naomi turned toward him. What do you want? Mr. Whitmore. A second chance to feel guilty the right way. No, he said. I want to see what happens when people who've been ignored get the resources they should have had all along. His tone wasn't grand. It wasn't rehearsed. It sounded like he believed it or needed to. Naomi looked back at the children. One of them was running in slow circles, arms out, chasing nothing in particular. The sun was in her eyes, and she lifted her hand to block it. Elijah noticed. In that moment, she looked, he couldn't explain it, unshaken. Like a woman who had bent every day for a decade but never snapped. The kind of strong that didn't need armor. She stood before he did, brushing crumbs from her lap. I don't need saving, she said. I know, and I don't owe you anything. You don't. But you showed up, she said quietly, and you listened. That's more than most. He nodded, unsure what to say. She turned to leave. He watched her walk back toward the clinic, her shoulders square, her stride sure. And just before she stepped inside, she glanced back over her shoulder just once, just enough. He didn't smile, just adjusted the bag on his lap, as if, somehow, the weight had shifted. The Avalon Grand didn't pretend to be subtle. Everything gleamed, floors polished to the point of reflection. Chandeliers like suspended stars. White linens so crisp, they dared you to wrinkle them. Naomi stood just past the entrance arch, hands clasped in front of her, dressed in a black sheath that wasn't new, but looked like it could be. Her heels were low, her back was straight. She didn't plan to stay long. The crowd moved in warm waves of laughter and perfume. People smiled too easily, shook hands too often. Most of them wore tags with logos, Whitmore Foundation, Jefferson Medical, Board of State Health Advisors. She recognized a few faces from grant committees, the kind who never looked up during interviews. None looked her way now. On stage. Elijah stood beneath the house lights, speaking to a room that didn't yet know what he was about to do. He looked composed, but Naomi could see the way his left hand curled slightly around the lectern. Not nerves, pressure, the kind you carry when your own name weighs more than your words. He spoke about silent valor, the kind not printed on plaques or broadcast in press releases. Healthcare, he said, is built not only on precision, but on moments of moral risk. On people who do what's right, even when policy doesn't agree. Naomi shifted on her feet. She had heard a dozen speeches like this before, empty praise for invisible sacrifice. But then he paused. The lights dimmed slightly. A screen behind him flickered to life. No title, no warning. Footage began grainy but clear. A trauma bay. Naomi herself. Sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed in focus, gloved hands pressed into a patient's open chest. It was unmistakable. Her body blocking the hemorrhage, her voice calling out orders. The hospital timestamp blinked in the corner to 12 a.m. Jefferson Medical Center. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers. Chairs shifted. Even the sound system seemed to hold its breath. Elijah spoke again, his voice lower. I watched this footage not as a patient, but as a man who had no idea someone like her would be the reason I'm standing here tonight. She didn't ask for recognition. She broke protocol because someone was dying, and because doing the right thing sometimes means standing alone. He didn't say her name, but he didn't need to. In the front row, Dr. Charles Grant's jaw tensed. Naomi caught the flicker in his expression, a twitch just above his brow, like a man recognizing his mistake too late. Naomi remained by the column, unmoving. Her fingers brushed the clutch in her hand but didn't open it. She wasn't ready to speak, not yet. After the applause measured, unsure, but persistent guests returned to champagne and soft conversation, Naomi turned to leave. Her heart caught between retreat and something else. Then Elijah appeared beside her, walking from the stage like it had cost him something to step down. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I know. They'll say you're manipulating the media. They already are. She looked up at him. For once, his suit didn't seem like armor. It looked like something he'd worn to be allowed in the room, long enough to open a door. I don't want to be a symbol, she said. You're the truth they tried to ignore. Naomi's shoulders dropped a fraction, just enough for him to notice. From behind them, someone whispered, too loud to be private. Is that her? The one from the video? Another voice replied, hushed but certain. He brought her here. You can tell. They have something, don't they? Naomi didn't turn around. She met Elijah's eyes instead. And for the first time since that night in the trauma bay, she didn't feel like she was about to be erased the morning after the Avalon Gala. Naomi walked back into the South Shore Community Clinic with a face carefully composed and eyes that refused to linger on any one thing for too long. She had been gone only 2 days, but the air in the waiting room felt heavier, now denser with the kind of attention she never asked for. Vanessa, the front desk nurse, gave her a look that hovered between curiosity and caution. You good? She asked, sotto voce, eyes flicking toward the stack of folders Naomi had just picked up. Naomi nodded. Just another day. But it wasn't. She could feel it. By noon, the whispers had grown legs. In the break room, over microwaved soup and untouched yogurt cups. Someone murmured, Did you see the footage? That was her. The one who saved that man. Another voice followed Elijah Whitmore. He said it himself, right there on stage. No one confronted her directly. That would have taken courage. Instead, she felt it in the pauses when she entered a room, in the sudden silence that always seemed one beat too deliberate. The people she used to work beside now eyed her with something that wasn't admiration. It was assessment. It wasn't the same contempt she'd fought through at Jefferson. This was sharper, quieter, less about disbelief, more about discomfort, like they couldn't decide whether she had crossed a line or been invited to a world where they'd never be allowed. By 3 p.m., she left early, citing a family errand. No one asked what kind elsewhere in the city, at Whitmore Health Systems headquarters on North Wacker Drive. Elijah sat in a glass-walled boardroom surrounded by advisors who spoke in numbers and consequences. This association with Dr. Brooks is complicating the narrative, one of them said. You're making the foundation look reactive. Another chimed in. There's a difference between being grateful and being entangled. Elijah didn't interrupt. He didn't agree either. His fingers tapped gently against the edge of a printed proposal in front of him, a thick dossier bound in navy blue. The title, Crisp, Equity and Access. A regional model for medical training in underserved communities. It wasn't charity. It wasn't branding. It was something that had been gathering dust in a forgotten folder until Naomi's voice, clear, unflinching, had burned through the noise in his head. That evening, he drove himself. No driver, no assistant. The sun was already low when he parked near Naomi's building in Bronzeville. He stood under the dim street lamp, a manila envelope in his hand, the same dossier folded neatly inside. He didn't text, didn't call, just waited. Naomi stepped outside 20 minutes later, carrying out a paper bag she assumed was from DoorDash. She froze when she saw him. He didn't move, didn't smile, just held out the envelope like someone passing a note across a great distance. "I'm not offering a job," he said. "I'm asking for help." She stayed still, eyes narrowed. "This proposal, what you outlined 2 years ago, it deserves to breathe. But I can't make it real without someone who knows where it hurts first." He held it out further. "You know where to begin." "I don't." The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was something else. Waiting. Weighing. Naomi stepped forward, slowly. She took the envelope from his hand, not quickly, not reluctantly. Then she looked up. "And what makes you think I still care?" He didn't answer right away. "Then because you showed up, even when no one thanked you. That kind of person doesn't forget how to fight." She glanced down at the envelope again. Her thumb ran along the seam, but she didn't open it. Behind her, the lights of her apartment window flickered. She didn't motion to invite him in, but she didn't tell him to leave either. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer, then stepped inside without closing it all the way. The elevator ride to the 47th floor was longer than Naomi expected, not in time, but in breath. Every few seconds. She found herself adjusting the sleeves of the borrowed navy blazer, trying to make the shoulders sit right, though they never quite did. The badge clipped to her lapel read, "Consultant, Equity in Medicine," printed too neatly for how uneasy it felt. The doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped into a room lined with floor-to-ceiling glass. Beyond the windows, the Chicago River curled like a ribbon of light. Inside, a dozen people sat around a wide marble table, each with an identical leather binder, each already halfway into some conversation about funding models and regional outreach. The talking stopped when she entered. Elijah stood first. "This is Dr. Naomi Brooks. She's consulting with us on the community access rollout." A few nodded. One man didn't bother looking up. Another, a woman in a tailored blazer, offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Naomi walked to the far end of the table. She didn't sit until someone gestured. No one told her where to put her voice. The discussion resumed graphs on screen, buzzwords like scalability and public-private integration floating above the real problems she knew too well. Elijah let the room run until, during a lull, he turned to her. "You've seen it on the ground. Naomi, what's missing?" She didn't rush. "Then, if you want to serve the overlooked, try asking them what they actually need." The silence that followed was not thoughtful. It was brittle. A man 2 seats down leaned over to a colleague and mumbled, "Is she one of the interns?" No one laughed, but no one stopped him either. Naomi didn't flinch. She had long since trained her face to be still when met with small knives like that. But Elijah's expression changed, not anger, disappointment, directed somewhere he didn't yet name. The meeting crawled on. During the break, Naomi stepped out to the lounge near the espresso bar, needing something stronger than coffee and settling for air. That's when the boy approached. 7, maybe 8. Wore a polo too big and carried a juice box in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper in the other. He didn't say a word, just held it out. She took the drawing carefully. It was a marker sketch, rough lines, bold colors. A dark-skinned woman in a white coat, one arm lifted toward the sun. Above the figure, scrawled in shaky handwriting, Dr. Hope. She stared at it, unsure why her throat tightened the way it did. Elijah found her there a moment later. He didn't speak right away, just looked at the paper in her hand. His eyes moved slowly, as if the image had caught him off guard. When he finally looked up, there was something softer than gratitude in his face. something closer to belief. Then the voice came from behind. Rivera. It was sharp, surprised, and loud enough to snap the moment in two. Wait, isn't she related to Jeremiah Brooks? The woman who asked didn't mean harm, but her voice carried the weight of old politics. Naomi turned. Her smile faded. The room had shifted again. This time, not from what she said, but from who they now suspected her to be. A name she didn't use, a man she hadn't seen in decades, and a history she had kept folded tight in the back of her life, never daring to unpack it in places like this. She met Elijah's eyes for a flicker. Then she looked down at the drawing again, and the girl in the coat was still raising her hand like she knew she belonged. Naomi didn't wait for the elevator. She moved fast, heels clicking against marble, the edge of her blazer flaring behind her like a coat she couldn't shrug off fast enough. The silence from the boardroom still clung to her shoulders, the way it always did when a room realized who she really was, not by merit, not by choice, but by name. 3 blocks. She walked them like she had somewhere to be, though she didn't. Downtown traffic roared past, indifferent. Her reflection in a shop window looked composed, until a gust of wind pulled her scarf loose and exposed a tremble she thought she'd buried years ago. She hadn't planned on remembering that night, but the air smelled the same damp concrete and a hint of metal. The fall her father packed his briefcase and walked out. She was 10. Her mother didn't cry until the door clicked shut. Naomi had memorized that sound. She stopped on a corner near Jackson and Wells, hands in her coat pockets, shoulders squared. She could feel Elijah's footsteps behind her before she heard them. He didn't call out, just followed, at a distance. When he caught up, he didn't try to close the space between them. How long have you known? His voice was low, gentle, not apologetic yet. She kept her back to him. Since the photograph, she said, the one you slipped into the invitation like a favor. I knew then, but you knew first, and you said nothing. A long breath passed. She imagined him shifting his weight, unsure if he should step closer or stay still. He wasn't a good father, Elijah said. I know what he did. To your mom. To you. He left us too. In a way. I just didn't realize how far the damage reached. Naomi turned slowly. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp. He built the hospital that threw me out. He trained the man who fired me. He chose a system where women like my mother cleaned up blood, and men like you were handed the scalpel. That's the family you come from. Elijah didn't flinch, but the truth settled in his chest like something heavy. That's not the family I want to build. No, she said, but it's the one that built you. For a moment, neither of them moved. Cars passed. A bus hissed as it pulled to the curb. Naomi looked past him, toward nothing in particular. Then she shook her head, more tired than angry. I fought for years to be seen, she said, not because of who my father was, but in spite of it. You walk into a room and they listen. I walk in and they check my name tag twice. Tell me how that's fair. Elijah didn't have an answer. He didn't pretend to. She stepped around him, back toward the city that had never once paused for her pain. This time, he didn't follow. He just stood on the sidewalk, hands at his sides, watching the wind carry her scarf in the opposite direction of where she was headed. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. Naomi hadn't been back to the community clinic since the incident at Whitmore Tower, not as a consultant, not as a doctor. This time, she returned as a daughter, wheeling her mother into the check-in line on a brisk Monday morning. The waiting room was full, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and quiet tension. She sat beside her mother, watching the clock tick past appointments they weren't called for. Her mother's cough had worsened over the past week, and Naomi knew what the new specialist had prescribed a biologic medication, expensive and rarely approved on a Medicaid plan. She had argued with the pharmacist, called the insurer, sent faxes to a system that only ever responded with, "We're sorry, this is outside coverage." She'd stopped by a used car lot the day before. Her Corolla, old but running, was all she had left of her independence. She hadn't told her mother yet, but she planned to sell it the next day. That night, she came home late from the pharmacy, empty-handed. The hallway to her apartment was dimly lit, humming with the low buzz of the radiator. When she reached her door, she froze. A package sat on the mat, brown paper, no note. Just her name typed cleanly on a label. Inside, the exact medication she'd spent days chasing, and stapled to the front, a pharmacy receipt with the words, Whitmore Patient Relief Initiative, paid in full. Naomi stood motionless for a moment, fingers still resting on the torn flap. There was no doubt in her mind who had done it. No performance. No, I told you I'd fix it. Just the action, left in silence. She placed the box on the kitchen table and sat across from it. Her eyes didn't water. They stayed sharp, scanning the corners of what this meant, not as a favor, but as a choice. Not loud, not explained, just there. A week passed before the next ripple came. She was at the clinic again, this time volunteering at the front desk, while her mother received treatment. The clinic director, a man named Thompson, called her into his office during lunch. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, leaning in. "We just got a $20,000 anonymous donation for the outpatient program. No conditions. Just asked for discretion." Naomi didn't reply. She simply sat back, legs still, arms folded gently across her lap. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "You know anything about it?" She shook her head once, but he didn't press. He just nodded, like he understood that some names didn't need to be spoken aloud to be felt. Later that evening, her mother opened the new bottle of medication with hands steadier than the week before. She looked at the label, then at Naomi, a knowing expression flickering in her tired face. "That boy still hasn't said sorry. Has he?" Naomi smiled faintly, not with words. Her mother popped the first pill, took a sip of water, and leaned back against the cushions. "Then maybe he means it." Naomi turned toward the window. The city lights flickered through the blinds. Somewhere out there, a man had decided to act, not speak, and for the first time, she wasn't sure which one said more. She didn't close the blinds, but she didn't step away either. Elijah returned to his penthouse on Lakeshore Drive just past midnight. He didn't turn on the lights. The view outside was a stretch of blinking city lights, the surface of Lake Michigan almost motionless. But inside, the silence pressed harder than usual. He sat on the floor beside the bookshelf, pulled out an old black notebook. His father's handwriting filled the pages neat, bold strokes, always in blue ink. There was one line he stopped on, written years ago during a board meeting recap. "The system works when people know their place." Elijah stared at it. Then, without hesitation, he tore the page out and set it aside, not because he wanted to erase it, but because he no longer wanted to carry it. He spent the night rereading the other pages, but none of them answered the ache he carried between legacy and guilt, between his last name and the silence Naomi had left him with. The next morning, he didn't go to work. Instead, he drove to South Shore Community Center, where a small memorial was being held for patients who'd passed away in the last year, many of them from treatable conditions, simply lacking access or insurance. No press, no speeches, just names read out loud by volunteers, candles flickering against plastic folding chairs. Elijah didn't tell anyone he would be there. He parked 2 blocks away, walked quietly in, wore no suit, just a charcoal coat and worn shoes. When he entered the multi-purpose hall, he didn't head to the front. He stood near the back, behind an older couple holding hands. Halfway through the list of names, he saw her. Naomi sat 3 rows ahead, hair tied back, hands resting in her lap. She didn't look around, didn't flinch when names were mispronounced. Her eyes stayed steady, gaze locked on the row of candles along the table. One of them had her mother's name scrawled in marker beside it, Margaret Brooks. She had passed just 3 days earlier. After the ceremony ended, people slowly filtered out. Naomi remained in her seat. Elijah hesitated before approaching. He didn't want to intrude, but she turned slightly, sensing him. Her voice was quiet. She passed peacefully. "At home." He nodded once. Slow. "I saw her name. I'm sorry." Naomi didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had no sharp edge, only weight. I saw what you donated. The grief counselor, the home hospice nurse. You never put your name on anything. I didn't think it would help, Elijah said. But I had to do something. She stood and looked at him fully for the first time in weeks. There was no anger in her face now, just fatigue and something close to clarity. You're not trying to fix the past anymore, she said. You're trying to face it. That's different. Elijah stepped back, giving her space. I know you don't owe me anything, he said, but if there's ever a day you want to walk back into any room without feeling like it's a battle, I hope I've helped open that door. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then lowered her eyes. I haven't forgiven you, she said. He nodded. I'm not asking you to, but I don't want to forget you either. Elijah's throat tightened. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to hold the moment, just stood there, the wind pushing through the cracked open window behind the candle table. Naomi stepped past him, heading toward the door, but just before she exited, she paused. She didn't look back, but he knew something had shifted. The morning Naomi stepped into the old West Englewood clinic, dust still hung in the air like memory. The building had been abandoned for years, paint peeling from the window frames, graffiti etched into every surface, but the bones were still good. That's what she told the volunteers. The bones are good. We can build from here. This time, she wasn't alone. Elijah stood beside her, sleeves rolled, no assistant in sight. He carried toolboxes instead of talking points, didn't offer suggestions unless asked, and when she spoke, he listened without the tight jaw or measured distance he used to wear. Naomi had agreed to lead the redesign of the new community health program, but only under one condition. Every proposal had to be approved by the people who'd be served, not executives, not donors, not consultants who'd never set foot west of Halstead, and Elijah agreed. They organized listening sessions with residents, nurses, street vendors, even former patients who had once sworn off the medical system entirely. Naomi sat in folding chairs beside teenagers and grandmothers, asked what they needed, and actually wrote it down. The plan was simple: reopen the clinic as a community hub, staffed by trainees under the guidance of local retirees. Services would include basic care, mental health counseling, nutrition classes, and a rotating evening clinic for undocumented patients. The funding was modest, the skepticism was loud, but the response, when the doors finally opened, was louder. No ribbon cutting, no local news. Just a Saturday afternoon with chili simmering in crockpots and kids painting handprints along the outer wall. A mural slowly took shape, dozens of silhouettes stitched together by thin gold lines, each one labeled with a short story. A woman who beat breast cancer after walking away from the ER the first time, a father who gave up his meds for groceries, a girl who taught herself CPR after her aunt collapsed at church. One of the retired nurses brought out a plaque, just a small piece of brushed steel. Naomi read the engraving quietly, then handed it back. Let's put this by the door, she said. No names, just this. The plaque read, for everyone who was told they didn't belong. Later that day, children gathered in the courtyard with juice boxes and clipboards. They'd started calling Naomi Dr. N, even though she'd long stopped correcting them. One of the boys tugged at her sleeve, eyes wide. Miss Naomi is Mr. Elijah gonna teach us more about blood types and stuff. She followed his finger to where Elijah was unloading folding tables from a borrowed van. His shirt stuck to his back, soaked from sweat. But he didn't seem to notice. Just moved one table after another, careful not to scrape the paint. Naomi squinted against the sun. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she smiled, small, but real. The rain had lifted. The sky was that rare kind of blue Chicago, offered only after a long storm, soft, forgiving, like the air had finally exhaled. Naomi stood near the edge of the playground, where the clinic volunteers had set up makeshift booths. Folding tables held stethoscopes, glucose strips, water bottles, and clipboards scribbled with check marks. It was a free wellness day, Naomi's idea. No registration, No questions asked. Just come, get checked, leave with a snack if you wanted. Children darted between stations, holding cotton balls to their arms like medals. Their laughter wasn't quiet, but it was the kind that didn't demand permission. Elijah moved from booth to booth, not as the CEO of Whitmore Health, but as a man holding clipboards and calming nerves. He knelt beside a girl afraid of needles, let a boy wrap a blood pressure cuff around his own arm. Then it happened. A little boy, no older than 5, burst through the crowd, curly hair bouncing as he ran straight for Elijah. Without pause, he grabbed Elijah's sleeve and shouted, loud and proud, "Daddy, look, I didn't cry." The world stopped for a beat. The nurse at the immunization table froze. Naomi's hand, halfway to her pocket, went still. Even the wind seemed to hush. Elijah blinked. And then, he did something that made Naomi's chest tighten. He didn't laugh, didn't look confused. He simply dropped to one knee, meeting the boy's eyes. "You didn't. That's brave," he said, his voice low. "I'm proud of you." The child grinned, unaware of the silence he'd summoned. Then his real father appeared from behind the snack station, calling his name, and the boy dashed off like nothing happened. But Elijah remained kneeling a second longer. Naomi had seen that kind of stillness before in people realizing not what they had, but what they'd never been given. Later that evening, back at her mother's apartment, the hallway smelled faintly of lavender tea and old books. Her mother, never one for long conversations, handed Elijah a cup without formality. "Here, Eli," she said, using his name for the first time. "You're patient with my daughter. That's not easy." Elijah smiled, not wide, not smug, just warm, tired, grateful. Naomi turned toward the living room, then stopped. Something about hearing her mother say his name made it real in a way she hadn't expected. They saw off the last guests together, standing on the top step as the street lamp flickered on, catching in the curls of her hair. She didn't look at him when she said it. "I don't know when I started trusting you," she said quietly, "but I know I do now." The elevator to the 55th floor opened with a softened chime. Elijah stepped out alone. The corridor was lined with framed photos of ribbon cuttings, polished plaques, and faces in suits that hadn't changed in decades. At the end, the double doors to the Whitmore executive boardroom stood open. The air inside was taut with politeness, too quiet to be civil. He took his place at the long table without looking for a chair with his name. There were no nameplates today, just a half-empty carafe of coffee and the faint clink of a spoon stirring sugar too long. A woman from the governance committee cleared her throat. "We appreciate the community work being done, Mr. Whitmore. But your visibility alongside Naomi Brooks has raised concerns regarding personal influence over organizational strategy." A younger man added, "Shareholders have begun asking if our priorities have shifted." Then came the real blow. A senior board member, a man who had known Elijah since he was a teenager, folded his hands and said, flat and cold, "At some point, you will have to choose your company or your connection to her." Elijah stood, not hurriedly, not with fire, but like someone who had already decided what he would carry with him and what he would leave behind. "I'm not choosing between a woman and a corporation," he said, voice calm, even. "I'm rebuilding this system so that no one like her is ever forced to make that choice again." Ha! Silence. Not shock, more like acknowledgement. Like some of them already knew they'd lost the argument, but needed to go through the motions. Later that afternoon, Naomi sat in the break room of the West Englewood Clinic, finishing a chart. A nurse walked in and casually mentioned, "They say Elijah Whitmore just told his board to go to hell. For you." Naomi didn't respond. Her hands kept moving, her notes precise. But something in her posture eased, just slightly. She didn't call him. She didn't need to. If he had spoken those words, it meant he had weighed the cost and still moved forward. Some things didn't need applause. They just needed to be real. That night, her inbox dinged. No sender name, no subject line, just an attachment. She hesitated, opened it. A clipped audio file, grainy at first, then sharper. Male voices, familiar cadence, one voice, unmistakable Dr. Charles Grant. She's got too much mouth. I've waited years to drop that black girl from the program. Just needed the right screw-up. Naomi's eyes didn't blink. Her breath didn't catch. The rage, strangely, didn't rise. Just a calm clarity. A sense that justice had taken its time, but now, maybe, it was finally catching up. She closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. Her reflection in the window looked older, but not worn. Stronger, but not hard. Something right was coming, and this time, it would not pass her by unnoticed. The ballroom of Avalon Grand shimmered with silver drapes and muted light. The floral centerpieces smelled expensive, but sterile, like something cut too early. Waiters moved soundlessly with trays of wine glasses no one really wanted but kept holding. On stage, a large screen looped a polished montage of the Whitmore Health Legacy ribbon cuttings, press clippings, smiling donors, and in the center of it all, the featured guest of the evening, Dr. Charles Grant. He stood just off stage, adjusting his tie. He nodded to a coordinator, then smirked toward a young assistant fumbling with the mic settings. "Let's make it quick," he muttered. "I've got a flight to catch." Naomi and Elijah stood near the back wall, half shadowed by a column, away from the press. She wore a navy dress. Simple. He hadn't said much on the drive over. There was nothing left to plan, nothing left to hide. The announcer's voice rose. "Please welcome, a pioneer in equitable care, a name we've trusted for decades, Dr. Charles Grant." Scattered applause. He stepped to the podium, lips already curled in that practiced smile. He hadn't even opened the folder in front of him when the screen behind flickered. Once, then twice. Then went black. And then the audio started. No visuals. Just sound, raw, unedited. A voice filled the room, flat, familiar, and sharp as flint. "I've waited years to drop that black girl from the program. Just needed the right screw-up." The applause stopped. Chairs creaked. A glass clinked to the floor somewhere. On screen, the date stamp of the file glowed in the corner 3 months ago. Jefferson Campus boardroom. The audio kept rolling. "She's loud, always asking questions. Not our type." Grant froze. His eyes darted toward the tech booth, but no one moved to stop it. People were staring. Some pulled out their phones. Others leaned toward each other, whispering now faster, louder. Then came the final blow. "Once she's out, no one like her's getting back in. Not under my watch." A beat of silence. Then the ballroom doors opened. 2 agents in dark suits stepped in, calm and direct. One raised a folder, the other addressed the stage. Voice clear. "Dr. Charles Grant, you are under investigation for discriminatory practices in federal healthcare systems, obstruction, and falsification of operational records." Grant tried to speak, but his mic was already off. The folder in the agent's hand unfolded to reveal the arrest warrant. His hands shook as they reached for the edge of the podium. He didn't look for allies. None of the old friends stood. No board members moved. They were all still, as if distance might protect them from contamination. From the back, Elijah stayed motionless. Naomi's fingers grazed his sleeve, but she didn't step forward. She didn't need to. A young reporter spotted her, walked over, breath quick, mic already raised. "Miss Brooks, do you have any comment on what just happened?" She didn't blink. Her voice was low, but steady. "Truth doesn't need to scream," she said. "It just needs to be seen." Then she turned back, watching as the agents guided Dr. Grant past the spotlight, past the rows of people who had clapped for him, and into a corridor where applause had no power left. The morning air smelled like dew and sidewalk chalk. Children had drawn suns and hearts across the pavement outside the refurbished building, once an abandoned clinic, now bearing a new sign with painted steel letters, Naomi Brooks Institute for Public Medicine. No fireworks, no red carpet. But the crowd was steady neighbors in fold-out chairs, nursing students with clipboards, retired nurses in white sneakers and flowered scrubs. A few local reporters stood near the sidewalk, unsure whether to stay or pack up their cameras. Naomi stood behind the wooden podium, no speech in hand, no title pinned to her lapel. Her mother sat in the front row, the silver of her hair braided down one side, a quiet pride in her eyes that didn't need explaining. Beside her, a little girl with barrettes shaped like stars swung her legs and held Naomi's hand without saying a word. Across the yard, Elijah was pouring juice into paper cups. His apron had a faded orange cat printed on the front, someone's joke gift. Probably, but he wore it like it had always been his. Around him, a few young volunteers washed medical kits and arranged brochures on folding tables. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice was low and steady, not rehearsed, just lived. "I remember my first day as a resident," she said. "I was 24. I showed up early for rounds and waited outside the conference room. Everyone else walked past me. I didn't have my white coat on yet." She looked out over the faces in front of her, some young, some aged, none unfamiliar. "I waited through the whole meeting. No one invited me in. No one asked if I belonged. They just assumed I didn't." There was silence, not heavy, just full. She continued, "So today, this building doesn't care what coat you wear, or if you wear one at all. The door's open to anyone with hands ready to help and a heart that remembers what it feels like to be left outside." Applause rose not sharp, but round and warm, a sound that wrapped around the brick walls and settled into the rafters. Later, after the snacks were gone and the folding chairs stacked, Naomi stayed behind to help sweep the steps. That's when the little girl came back. She held out a piece of paper with a crayon drawing two stick figures, a woman in a white coat with curls like Naomi's, and a man holding a red first aid box, his smile crooked but sure. At the bottom, the caption said, "Miss Naomi and Mr. Eli. They fix us." Naomi knelt to take it. She didn't speak. Just folded the paper carefully and placed it into her coat pocket like a vow. From across the courtyard, Elijah looked up. He didn't wave, just stood by the sink, sleeves rolled, laughing with a student as bubbles slipped from the tray. She walked toward him. He kept washing. She didn't need to call his name, and he didn't need to ask why she came. Only dried his hands, turned toward her, and made room in the small space between the two tubs. She stood beside him, the air between them easy, familiar, no headlines, no declarations, just a quiet return, where something broken once was. The water kept running, but neither of them moved away. The paint on the clinic's wall was still drying when a little girl placed her hand against it, leaving a smudge of pink and blue where the name Naomi was written. No one cleaned it. No one wanted to. Some stories aren't meant to be polished. They're meant to be lived messy, unfinished, honest. And maybe that's enough. Maybe justice isn't always loud. Maybe healing begins in the smallest of rooms, where someone decides to stay,